Hi, Class 7. Dr. Steen here. I'm at school right now. I wanted to be here so that I could use Mr. Bones to demonstrate, because we're going to talk today about the skeletal system. It is very, very quiet here at school, way, way too quiet. I hope you guys are doing well. And I hope you're social distancing. Mr. Bones and I don't need to social distance because he's not alive. All right, so I'm going to switch over to slides. Let me see if I can do this. I left you a slide handout that you're welcome to use if you want to follow along. If that helps you listen, you could print that out and take notes. And if you decide to do that and you need a little more time to take notes on one of the slides, go ahead and just pause the video. So here we go with our slides. All right, so skeletal system. Some of those bone names probably sound really familiar. We're going to go over a few of them right now. First of all, just to remind you, here's again the hierarchy of organization in biology. And this is kind of reverse order. We're coming down from organism. We've got organ system way down at the bottom. Again, we're doing skeletal system. The organs of skeletal system, the most familiar is bones. And then tissue. Now what bone tissue is, if you look at their connective epithelial, muscle, and nervous tissue, the one that bone is made up of is connective tissue. And the connective tissue and minerals, okay? The minerals are the one you're most familiar with. That when you see just a bone, what you're seeing is the leftover minerals, basically, all right? So, and your skeleton is about 15% of your full body weight, give or take, depending on your particular body. All right, so this is one of the handout pages if you want to take notes on it. The skeleton is divided into two different parts, and this part isn't in your textbook, but I think it's interesting. You've got about 206 bones. Now that's an average. Let me give you an example. One of my younger sisters went to a chiropractor and he said, "You've got an extra vertebrae." So she has at least 207 bones, but 206 is the estimate that most people use. Some of your bones, the ones shown in this picture as yellow, this is called your axial skeleton. It's made up of about 80 bones, and you can see that's kind of the central. So think axis, the part that everything turns around, or the axle of a wheel, or the axis of a circle. You can see those are the central ones. So that includes your skull, right, which is actually 22 different bones. Your sternum, now that's the flat part. If you look here at Mr. Bones, that's the part that his Wilbur tie is hanging on, that flat part right in the middle. You can feel that on you as well. The ribs, that's an obvious one, right? And you can see how ribs are so protective, as is a skull, right? They're both protecting very fragile organs. The skull's protecting your brain, and the rib cage is protecting your heart and lungs and lots of other important organs. And then your spine, and we talked a lot about that as vertebrae, right? We'll go into more detail there. The ones shown in green in this picture are the appendicular skeleton. Now that is a crazy looking word, but I want you to remember for a minute, when we talked about arthropods, we talked about how they have jointed appendages. Okay, so appendicular comes from the same root word as appendage. And so I want you to notice that all these bones shown in my slide as green, these are all either part of your appendages, your arms and legs, or they are the attachment points where your appendages are attached to your skeleton. And like arthropods, you have jointed appendages, and we'll talk more about those joints in just a minute. All right, these include all the bones in your arm, the bones in your leg, the attachment points. For example, your clavicle, and you can probably feel that on you. That's that bone that attaches from the base of your neck out to your shoulder, all right? That includes your scapula. That's your shoulder blade. If you move your arm, it's the one that feels kind of like a wing, and then your pelvis. And that's, when you put your hands on your hips, you're feeling your pelvis bone. All right, now, just as an aside, because it's interesting, do you know what the smallest bone in your body is? And I imagine some of you do. It's called the stirrup, and it's deep inside your ear. So here I have a picture comparing it to a euro, 10-cent euro coin, but just to show you how small it is compared to a coin. And then can you find that same bone shown in blue deep in the center of the ear? So it's in your middle ear, and it helps kind of pass on vibrations for your brain to process. And it's very, very small, about 2.5 millimeters. And this also reminds me, all the organ systems we're going to talk about, in every single case, you're going to see connections to other systems, other organ systems. So here, this little bone is connecting the skeletal system to the nervous system, which includes your brain. You'll see lots of connections like that. I'd like you to look for those. The largest bone, well, yours is your femur. That's the bone at the top of your leg. The largest bone known to humankind so far, as of this past summer, is this about 6.5 feet long femur. It was just found in France, and it's thought to be from a plant-eating sauropod, which are the ones that look a lot like that. That's just an artist's picture. We don't really know what the outside of them looked like, but just to give you an idea of how big this was compared to a human. All right, let's go over a few bones in particular. I'm going to switch now over to Mr. Bones and I. So give me just a minute to do that. All right, here we go. All right, so here, Mr. Bones. So again, this is the clavicle, all right? You can feel that on you. This big one back here, this is the scapula, all right? This right here is the sternum, and you can feel that on you as well. You are already familiar from us talking about vertebrae, that this is the vertebral column, and it goes way down. Let me see if I can. We talked about the pelvis. Those are these ones sticking out down here. Yeah. All right. Some other just familiar ones. This one here, your upper arm here. This is called the humerus. Again, you don't need to know these. I'm just telling you this because I think it's interesting. Your lower arm here, this is the ulnus and the radia. Now, the radia, you can feel it on you. That's the one that goes from your elbow to your thumb. And then the ulna goes from your elbow to your pinky finger. All right, so this would be the radius. This would be the ulna. So when you do that Miss America wave, when you don't move your elbow, when you just go like this, it's mainly your radius. You can put your arm around like this. You can feel with your hand, and you can feel your radius moving a lot. That's the one that's moving there. All right. Femur. Let me see if I can get my camera to show down here. Let's see. Femur. Okay, so this is the femur. This is your largest bone. Okay, this one down here. All right. Thank you, Mr. Bones. You've been a very good demonstrator with me. Let's switch over here again. Okay, now I'm going to go back to my slides. Give me just a minute. All right, here we go again. Okay, so we talked about, slide. All right, so we talked about some familiar bones, including the humerus, which of course is subject to many great puns. Let's talk about the functions of different bones. Now, you took notes on this in the chapter of your textbook, but I'd like to go over it again just because it's really important. So first of all, they give shape and support to the body. You can see that from how they work. This gives something that your muscles can pull against. So supports muscles, so allowing you to move. They protect the internal organs. Now, you definitely saw this, right? When we looked at Mr. Bones here, the skull, that's protecting your very fragile, important brain. And then this rib cage is protecting your, a lot of your other internal organs. Also, your bones, and you might not have been as familiar with this, but this is where you produce blood cells. We think of bones as kind of just being kind of sitting there and being kind of dry. Well, actually, your blood, your white blood cells that are part of your immune system, your red blood cells that are important for your circulatory system, they are produced deep inside your bones. And in fact, your bones are making about 1 trillion new blood cells every day. So a very busy place. And then finally, your bones are storage of minerals. So the minerals that make your bones hard, like calcium, are not only important to give you strength and structure for your body, but they're also stored. You need calcium and phosphorus for your nerves to function and for your muscles to function. So your bones are made with a lot of calcium. They're also made out of a protein called collagen. And an interesting experiment you can do at home if your family eats chicken, try to save a chicken bone, like from a chicken leg, and put it in vinegar. And what happens is that the vinegar, which is an acid, reacts with the calcium. You'll see a lot of bubbles come out. That's carbon dioxide as a reaction happens, and it takes out the calcium from the bones, leaving only the leftover collagen. Now, collagen is a protein that's also in your hair and your nails, and you know that your hair and nails are, you know, much more flexible. So if you soak a chicken bone for a few days in vinegar, a fresh chicken bone, not one that's been cooked, you will find that the bone gets really rubbery, and that's because all the calcium, all the minerals are gone, and what's left over is just the more flexible collagen protein. All right, next let's talk about joints. All right, this is just, again, this is part of what you read about. So there's different joints. Joints are just where two bones meet. There's ones called fixed joints, no movement at all, and the example is in your skull. Now, I don't think you can see this in Mr. Bones, but they did try to show where these different plates of the skeleton join together. Those are called sutures, where the skeletal plates join together. They're not meant to move at all. You don't want your skull moving around, all right? There's a picture there showing from the top. Those joints between those different parts of your skull do not move. There's semi-movable, all right? That's my last picture there of the vertebrae. They have movement, but it's pretty limited, and that would be like your rib cage and your vertebral column. And then finally, the really movable one, that's the middle picture at the bottom. These are ones with a wide range of motion, so their point is to move, all right? And an example there would be your hip, all right? So some joints, again, a joint just means where bones meet. Some are meant to move a lot, some a little, and some aren't meant to move at all. Let's look at some movable joints. And again, you already read about this, so you can see, and you can see the handout that I made you for these slides if you want to take notes. There's different types called, for example, the ball and socket. These are the ones that give you the most motion. So if you try moving your arm around like that, you can see the ball and socket joint of your shoulder gives you a whole lot of motion. That's probably the one with the most, all right? And I don't know if you explored that website that I gave you, but I'll try to get that up in just a minute. We've got the hinge. That's like your elbow and knee. Those are ones that kind of just have a limited motion. They're not so much going around as just going back and forth. All right, here's the picture. There's the saddle. This is an interesting one. I think the only one in your body is the base of your thumb. So that is, if you count in your thumb bone. So you've got one bone at the tip, bone number 2. This is bone number 3 down here in your hand. The saddle one is way at the base of that, okay? And that's one that kind of just goes back and forth. It doesn't really go around. And that helps you with gripping. You have pivot ones. Those are the ones that let you say no, all right? That's the top 2 vertebrae in your spine. They just go back and forth like this, all right? And then you've got gliding. Those would be your wrist and your ankle, and they really help a lot with movement. Okay, let me see if I can get that website up. All right, I'm taking you over to that cool website. Here it is. And I gave you a link to this in your homework. Okay, so this is just kind of demonstrating different kinds of joints. So this is the saddle joint. That's the one we talked about that's at the base of your thumb. All right, there's other ones. Again, the one with the most motion is the ball and socket. This is the one in your shoulder and your hips. Right, lots of motion there. And you can play around with this and try different ones. And some of these are ones that just have different names. This is the one this is the saying no muscle, joint, the one in your base of your, some of your top vertebrae that lets you make your head go back and forth. So just kind of cool there. We looked at all those. I think the last one, that's the picture on the bottom of the gliding joint. Again, that's a lot of the small bones in your ankle and wrist. Okay, let's look at the structure of a joint. You read about this. I think this picture really shows it well, the different jobs. So cartilage, and you can see there where the 2 bones meet in the joint, the cartilage is this protective layer that protects it from friction so that the bones aren't rubbing against each other. You've got ligaments, the totally different job. A ligament is connective tissue just holding the 2 bones in place. So you can see in this picture of a joint The cartilage is what it looks like the bones were kind of dipped in. The ligaments are, they're connective tissue, really tough stuff. It wouldn't be, so if you're eating a piece of chicken, this would be the part that would be too chewy. That's kind of holding the two bones together. That's shown as kind of a light purple around the outside. I don't think this is in your textbook, but I think this is interesting too. There's synovial fluid. That's the dark purple here between the two bones. And that's just, again, it's kind of extra lubrication and protection, just so those bones can handle a lot of pressure. If you think about you jumping, the ligaments are holding everything together. The cartilage and the synovial fluid are kind of cushioning and protecting. All right, now you've probably heard people talk about arthritis. This is a joint disorder. Two different kinds. There's rheumatoid arthritis. This would be in more middle-aged people, and this is an autoimmune disease where your immune system is attacking your joints. So your joints get really inflamed. You know, they'd feel warm, like as if you had a fever, but just in your joint would feel really warm and painful. The other kind that's more common in elderly people would be osteoarthritis. This is where it's from the cartilage has been damaged just from use over a lifetime. So that one is damaged, whereas rheumatoid arthritis is a disease of the immune system. This is just kind of interesting, joint replacement. I just wanted to show you some pictures. So all that damage to joints from a lot of use or maybe from a lot of weight. There are ways to replace them with plastics and metals and all sorts of different ways. Here's an interesting X-ray just showing, you know, it makes sense with these very important weight-bearing joints that they'd have to go deep into the bone to be able to keep it in place. Maybe you know somebody who's had a joint replacement. All right, what are bones made of? Well, they are made of cells. They are made of other things as well. So the part that's left over in a skeleton, like Mr. Bones here, would be a lot of the minerals. But bones, if you saw a living bone still in an organism, and again, if your family eats chicken, before the chicken is cooked, take a good look. Those bones are kind of moist, and they have, in addition to this leftover minerals and that the protein collagen, they do have living cells in them. So you see the one called osteocyte. Osteo means bone, cyte always means cell. Those are the ones that kind of oversee the bone and determine whether more bone needs to be made. Bone is being made all the time. In fact, about every 7 to 10 years, your bones have been entirely replaced. So we don't think of them as kind of dynamic and living, but they really are. So the osteocytes are kind of the managers that oversee. One of the kind of cells they'd be talking to is the osteoblasts. That's my second picture over there. Those are ones that make new bone. So when you're growing, your osteoblasts would be at hard work. But even just in an adult who's not growing anymore, the osteoblasts are replacing and remodeling the bone. They are the bone at the end there, the osteoclast. Those are bones that those are cells that actually break down your bone. And again, that's part of remodeling. We think about when we exercise that we're building new muscle, you're also building new bone. So when you're doing jumping jacks or running or playing sports, that use of your bones makes your bones stronger because your bones replace the old bone and are constantly making new bones. So that's your osteoblasts and osteoclasts are working together to remodel and make your bones stronger as you use them. And that's all overseen by our osteocytes. Not in your textbook, but just I think it's interesting. It is in your textbook that bones are made out of cells. All right, let's talk about the structure of bones. This is another one on the handout if you printed it out. Bones are made of minerals, that's again the calcium and the phosphorus, protein fibers, that's the collagen I talked about, and the living cells. So in your textbook, it talked about three main parts. There's the compact bone, and here in my picture, that would be the part that looks very solid, and it's very dense and hard. It's kind of shown as yellow. And you can see that there's blood vessels in that. That's kind of the outside part, like the bread of a sandwich. Then there's the spongy part. That's inside of the compact bone, further inside. And you can see that it's less, it's not as compact. There's a lot of space in there. And that makes your bones less heavy. If your bones were all compact, they'd be really heavy and it'd be hard for you to move. So this is lightweight, but they're also very, very strong. And this is more in these long bones. A long bone just means a bone that's longer than it is wide. So anyone that reminds you of what a cartoon dog is holding is a long bone. So the spongy bone is mainly at the ends of the bone. In the center of the bone is the bone marrow, and this is a very soft connective tissue. We talk about red bone marrow and yellow bone marrow. Red bone marrow is where blood cells are made, so it's very, very important. And then yellow bone marrow is where fat is stored, and that's also very important. That's for energy use. It's kind of your stored up energy for for between meals. Just kind of interesting, what is leukemia? Maybe you've heard people talk about leukemia. This is a cancer that begins in as a living cell in the bone marrow, the cells that produce your blood cells or your red blood cells or your immune cells. So it's a cell in your bone marrow that starts growing out of control. There's many different types depending on which kind of blood cell it's made from. And one way that people with leukemia are treated is a bone marrow transplant, where they actually take bone marrow out of a healthy donor, and it has to be somebody with a lot of matching, just like a blood donation. And they insert that bone marrow into the person with leukemia. So interesting. Interesting also what happens when you grow. So I'm going to show you some things about a fetus, so a baby that's not born yet, that's still growing, the mom, and a newborn baby, okay? So a fetus and a newborn baby, especially a fetus, most of the bones are developed from cartilage. So in the fetus, in the embryo, it's still cartilage. And then there's a process called ossification, which this cartilage is turned into bones or developed from into bones. The only one that's not true of is your skull. Most of your other bones are replacement of cartilage. This begins in about the 3rd month when you're inside your mom, so during your fetal development, and you still have bones turning, cartilage turning into bones, maybe still right now. So it's still happening. So this is kind of an interesting picture. This is a mouse embryo. So again, it's still in its mom. The red stain shows what's already bone, and the blue stain shows what's still cartilage. So you can see there's still a lot of blue in the lower skull, in the, what I'm going to call the fingers and toes, in the rib cage, and look at the scapula, the shoulder blades, but some of that is still going to turn into bone. Some of it doesn't. Between all your vertebrae, you have, even an adult human has little cartilage cushions between the vertebrae that are really important to help you be flexible, help you move, and also to cushion when you're running and jumping and exercising. Another really interesting thing about development is skull development. Your skull, like I said, is not developed from cartilage. It is bone, even before you're born. But there is cartilage between the parts of between those plates of the skull. So your osteocytes, those bone cells, are fusing together in layers and forming these flat plates. And if you look at the second picture down there, do you see that spot right in the middle where there's 4 plates of the skull haven't come together? This is a newborn child. And if you've ever heard people talk about the soft spot on a baby's top, on the top of a baby's head, that's what it is. That's where those plates of the skull haven't yet joined together. So we talk about that being a soft spot. You can ask your parents about that if you haven't heard that before. But that's because your skull is still growing when you're a baby. And the reason for this, your skull isn't done growing until you're about 2 years old. The reason for that is that it helps a baby be born, to have a little flexibility as it's coming out of the mom is really important. So, so that's still happening. Just some interesting pictures. Here are some pictures of, in some cultures, knowing that the skull of a baby is not all the way formed yet, there's places where they purposely change the shape of the baby's head. So that first picture, do you see that mom there's something tied to the front of the baby's head? The middle picture is a woman who had this done when she was an infant. And then the third picture there is just another device to kind of reshape that baby's head. This was often done in cultures where it was considered to have, it made you look royal or aristocratic if you had a skull of a certain shape. So just kind of interesting that some cultures have kind of made use of a baby's skull being what we'd say plastic, meaning still flexible, meaning not all the way formed and rigid yet. Okay, what about your bones when you grow, your other bones, your long bones? And again, these would be all the ones that are longer than they are wide. So, you know, your femur and the other ones we've talked about. You have a growth plate in there. Now, do you see on the picture, it calls it the epiphyseal plate? That's your growth plate. And that's near the end of your bones. That's where growth happens. So when you imagine, you know, your bone when you were, your arm bones when you were an infant compared to now, they certainly grew, right? Well, they don't just grow all over the place. They're only growing in those ends. So you had cartilage there in the ends. And those cartilage cells, if you look at there, it look like they're in columns. So they're the ones that are dividing. And as they divide, they're pushing older cells toward the middle of the bone. And then as those older cells die, they're replaced by new bone. So that's where growth is. So if you've ever broken a bone or heard somebody talking about a broken bone in a child and the parents say, oh, was the growth plate affected? Well, because if the growth plate is affected by a broken bone, that child's bone might not continue to grow properly. If the break is toward the middle of the bone, that's not actively growing. So that's not going to change the long-term shape of the bone. So for example, my son broke his ankle when he was still pretty close. He was close to being done growing, but he wasn't all the way done growing. And that was a concern of the doctors. They took a number of x-rays to check if it was affecting the growth plate, the epiphyseal plate, because they wanted to make sure that one of his legs didn't end up longer than the other. All right, if you have questions, you are welcome to post them to our Google Classroom to me, or in our Zoom chat this afternoon, you can ask me as well. If you are thinking of becoming a doctor, you are welcome to use your spare time to look at some good YouTube videos with all the names of the bones. You could memorize them if you want, or the names of the different parts of bones. There's a lot of just memorization in that, but if you enjoy that, you're very welcome to do that. All right, I hope you enjoyed our lesson on bones. I'm sure that Mr. Bones is happy to answer questions as well, and I will see you guys later. Bye.